Hey guys, Vazzy here. In today's video, I wanted to go over all my explanations of how I make rosters and the process behind it. I do want to start by saying there's no right way to make a roster. Everyone's going to see a player in a different light, and that's totally alright. You might think one guy's amazing where I might think he's not great. I might think a guy is not great where you think he's amazing. So back and forth, there really is no definitive way to really tell how good a player is overall. I just try and use the stats and different tools available to us to try and make the best, most accurate rosters as possible. And in today's video, I just kind of wanted to explain how I do that. And there really is a bunch of different things that go into that. The first thing I just wanted to start with here, it's quick, not much to say here, but the overall rating. As you see here, Jack Hughes 91 overall. Sure, that 91 overall might look good to you, might look good to me and everything like that, but you really do have to get into those more detailed stats, because it's kind of like a car, for an example here. Might look amazing on the outside, but the engines and everything might not be great, so it's kind of the same thing when looking at player ratings. It might look great on the outside, but the stats might not really align to where they are in real life. And that's kind of where I want to get to in this video and kind of explain my process regarding that. So I did want to briefly discuss the topic of player potentials here in game. And with that being said, there really is two different types of player potentials. The potentials for players who are veterans, who are 27 years and above, and the potentials of anyone else who is younger than that. These are two really completely different things. Younger players, obviously, it kind of sets how they're going to grow and perform throughout their career, where anyone who is older than 27, it doesn't mean as much when you're setting it here, but it does affect in the franchise mode. Let's say here, TJ Brodie. If I set him as a medium top 6 instead of a medium top 4 defenseman, he's going to regress faster than that in the franchise mode and really hurt that longevity of his career, which is why you see EA do some weird things and set older guys to like high elite potential. They're really just trying to keep that guy around for longer in the franchise mode and the simulation. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of that. I really think a player should just kind of have the potential that is where they're at. So if they're a top 4 defenseman, I think they should just be a top 4 defenseman potential-wise. If they are elite still, give them the elite. But yeah, I try and stick to somewhere around like that where, I don't know, I guess EA kind of just wants to keep those veterans in the game longer. I think they should probably more regress closer to where they would in real life anyways. And then for the younger guys' potentials, anyone who is below 27 years old, a lot of the time I go on draft position, especially for guys that are up and coming in the draft. If they're a first round pick, anywhere from 1 to 5, 100% elite potential, depending on who they are, could be higher. Anywhere who's going to be drafted from that 5 to 10-ish range, I try and give them high top 6 potential or high top 4. And anyone else other than that in the first round normally just gets a medium 6 or a medium 4. That's kind of how I work it for the first round anyways. And then anyone outside of that second round, you kind of like to give that high top 9 forward or high top 6 defenseman. And then anyone else kind of later in the draft, you can do medium 9, low 9, medium 6, bottom 6 for defensive wise. I find that kind of works out in real life. A lot of the time those lower ranked guys won't make it, but they still do have the chance to in game. They're not just complete throwaway like AHL potentials, which I find is a lot better when it comes to franchise mode. Alright, and up next I wanted to get into some of the stats that I look for the most here when editing players. So this is a tough one. Overall, let's look at TJ Brodie as an example. Great defensive defenseman. Actually, I have him set as a two-way defender. That probably should be more of a defensive defenseman, but just an oversight on my part. It does happen. A big thing I look at when a guy like this is his defensive stats. A lot of the time, EA will kind of balance everything out. They might sway it a little bit more defensively, but definitely not enough for a guy who is such an elite defender. But yeah, that's a big thing I look at first of all. So you want to definitely boost that up, and at the same time, try and bring down some of those offensive stats, definitely depending on the player. Look at his stats, look what he's put up the last 2 or 3 years when making that decision overall. And really, there's going to be players that you definitely know one way or the other, they're going to be great offensive guys, they're going to be great defensive guys. I find guys that are kind of in the middle that you don't really hear much about either way. Kind of set him at a mid-tier defensive rating. Give him like 85s across the board, 84, 83, somewhere in that low 80 to mid 80. I think is fair for that type of player, because obviously it is really tough to know where everyone's at, especially just when eyeballing it and all that. But for guys that you know for sure, definitely give them the higher defensive rating if they're a known defensive star. And if they are lower, make sure they definitely have that lower defensive category. And moving on to a guy who had a lower defensive category, moving on to John Klingberg. So he's a guy that I definitely had to bring down quite a bit on his defensive stats, and it's almost probably not enough. Hard to say. The tough thing about lowering a player's defensive stats like this is you really do have to spike up the offensive stats if you want to keep that overall somewhat respectable. So as you see here, he has 82 defensive awareness and 94 offensive awareness. That's honestly probably not too bad. But it really does help him keep that 82 overall in game, which makes the overall just look good on the outside, but does keep those in-depth stats somewhat balanced. The next thing I did want to talk about here is something I really didn't realize was such a big issue until I started doing work on my most recent roster update, and that's player positions. So this is something that was really one of the big factors and big points here in my most recent update. And I definitely recommend, if you are putting out a custom roster, to go through cap friendly, go team by team, spend some time going over the positions and making sure they're in line with the actual NHL positions that players are currently using. Really, I found this didn't take too much time, and I really recommend just doing it for forwards. Defensively, guys can play both sides. It's not the biggest deal, not the end of the world, but there's so many examples of centers who should be playing on the wing, wingers who should be playing centers, and wingers who are just on the totally wrong wing. This is something that the AI definitely does take into account when building out a roster, so you definitely want to make sure those guys are in the right spot when you load into a franchise mode, and to do that, you have to edit them to actually have that right position in-game. So here's just an example of this. For the longest time, I believe Troy Terry had a center position. I believe it was a second position. But this makes no sense. He's had 28 face-offs in his career. Why is he considered a center at all? This was literally the first example I could come up with. The one that, I don't know, just maybe it was the first one I edited, but I think I saw it online as well, someone bringing it up. It makes no sense overall. And there's a lot of those, let me tell you. So definitely spend your time going through this if you're creating a custom roster, or if you're just looking to tweak some of EA's default rosters here before you load into a franchise. Take a look at player positions and try and get those up to date as best as possible. The next thing I did want to talk about here briefly is the shoot pass bias. For me, this is something, for the most part, I mainly just eyeball it. I look at the last 2 or 3 years when it comes to goals and assists. That's a big thing for me. I look at the players' shots, just numbers-wise overall, and I kind of set it by that. If a guy's putting up a decent amount more assists than he is goals, he's going to definitely get a probably 8 to 11 pass bias. If he's a guy like Ovi, he's always shooting the puck, you're definitely going to get a lot more toward the shoot side. Obviously, it's pretty common sense, nothing too crazy. I have just seen some people asking about it. But yeah, for me, I kind of just eyeball it, kind of see what's right, do a little bit of testing in-game. Nothing too crazy with that, but definitely look at the stats and kind of make up your own estimations of where this should be at. And up next here is a big one that can get very messy, let me tell you, is player speed. So this is something that, with the new NHL Edge technology, we have been getting more insight onto this. This is something that I started looking at with defensemen, but like I said, it can get very messy. You have to really kind of calculate and track where everyone's at. But yeah, I kind of just go off the list. JFresh does an excellent job putting together all these lists on the top skaters from previous seasons and all that, as shown on screen. And really from there, basically I just start at the top of the list. I go and I kind of just assign a pretty decently high up speed, and I just go down the list. And kind of when it drops off, that's where I drop the speed 1 or 2, excel, same thing like that. Like I said, I really haven't done too much on this. It's a tough one, speed, especially just kind of quantifying that in a number. It's tough overall. It's good that we have this technology starting to come out, but yeah, it's tough. Like a guy like, even at the top, Noah Hannafin, I have no idea going into this that he was such a great skater, even like ahead of a guy like Cale Makar. Seems crazy to me, and it's definitely hard to quantify that. But yeah, I don't know. I just try and recommend using these lists, even if you're not going to go through every player and adjust it. Kind of look at who's at the top, who's at the bottom, and just kind of make your changes regarding that. And really the last thing I wanted to talk about today was face-off rating. Again, this is something I covered in the previous video, just going over the roster overview, as this was something that I had implemented into Update 3. But really, I think this is something we probably should have more of a focus on, just because you can really quantify it more by numbers in a way where it makes sense, where speed is tougher to do so. Face-off rating is something that we can definitely get more of an accurate representation of for sure. So really, as you see on my chart, it basically just comes down to the percentage overall as what a guy has had in a previous season or over his career. You can do either or, doesn't matter as long as you're consistent with it. And just assign a number. If a guy has a certain face-off rating, assign him that specific overall that he should have. And just go through everyone, go through as many players as you have time for, and just assign them those appropriate ratings. And hey, in all fairness, it should really relate and work out in franchise mode. And if it doesn't, I guess that's more of an EA issue, but we're doing the best we can on our end at least. But really, yeah, I think that's all I can really say here in regards to making a custom roster. Obviously, there's a ton of created players. Definitely take your time with those. Definitely look at their stats, look at where they're drafted for potentials and ratings, everything like that. Yeah, I don't really know what else I can add. I just kind of wanted to give some of the stuff that I look for that can be applied to obviously younger guys, older guys, everything in between. And really just trying to get the best rosters that you guys can have. Like I said, ratings are completely subjective. People look at ratings completely differently, so there's no right or wrong either way. But yeah, the number one thing I can say when making a custom roster, take your time. The more time you put into it, people are going to be able to tell, and you're going to definitely see those more realistic results to what you would see in real life. But yeah, that's all for this video. I will see you all in the next one.